First of all, to introduce you about what is time-lapse. Time-lapse, I have put you here a couple of videos. On the left, a video from the EVA system, and on the right, a video of Gary. Okay? So, this video, which is a video from EVA, is dark field. And the video of the Gary is bright field. Bright field is quite similar to the microscope, and the dark field is not at all. But the possibility of the dark field is that you can combine this video with a software that is able to track automatically the embryo and analyze it. So behind the dark field, there's a lot of opportunities of software analysis that we will see later. Time-lapse is not putting a camera in the microscope in the incubator and just record continuously the embryo. It's just taking pictures every 5 or 10 minutes, and then all these pictures are put together in a video that takes from 1 to 2 minutes to, let's say, describe or record all the embryo development. So we are summarizing 3 or 6 days of development in 1 or 2 minutes, okay? So with just a concentration of pictures, put it all together. Together with that, also with some time-lapse system like the Gary that is there, you can have different focal planes. So you can analyze your embryo and check all the features of the embryo at different focal planes. So it's like working with your microscope, but in the computer, in the screen, which is very nice. Just like an embryologist, you'll like this easier, just if you check morphology. So I have put you here an example of 2 time-lapse systems that are in the market. There are more time-lapse systems. Basically, we can split in 2. Time-lapse systems that are already an incubator with a camera inside, built in. And you have here 3 examples: the Miri time-lapse from ESCO, the Gary from Genia, and the EmbryoScope. All these 3 are already an incubator, very good incubators with a camera inside. The PrimaVision or the EVA, you have to put the camera in your box incubators. The difference between the EVA and the PrimaVision is that the EVA is dark field, fully automatic. And the PrimaVision, it works like the EmbryoScope or the ESCO of the Gary. It's bright field and you can check morphology. Technically, just this main difference. The other things are more, less important. Maybe you have different focal planes. The number of patients per machine is slightly different. The number of embryos that you can analyze per machine is between 12 and 16. So the number of total embryos that you can analyze also can change between one machine and another. Okay, but more or less, at the end, the technical things are slightly different, but the information or the way of using is similar, and the benefits are similar independently of the brand that you are going to purchase. And there are other facts that are important, like the brand, the money that you have to spend, who is selling the machine, the technical service, etc. That are also important. So I've been trying to summarize for you the 3 main things that you can do with time-lapse. The first one is learn like embryologist a lot and write new things about embryology that you learned in the past that you are destroying now. When I have the chance to discuss with people that has a time-lapse, here, for example, Paulus from here, every time that we talk, we can discuss new things that we have seen that we never seen before. So it's amazing what you can do, what you can learn about this technology, and how you can become a better embryologist. Because of that, we are discovering new things. We are doing a lot of nice research, and we are developing tools. At the end of this, the intention of this is to provide to our patients a better diagnosis of health. That's the final intention. But before that, there's a lot of things to do and a lot of research that is a challenge and is a very fascinating work for all of us. So in this presentation, I will go slowly to the main parameters that we normally can analyze by time-lapse technology, but this is just an example. So we can just track all the main events and annotate them. We call annotations because the main events of embryo development can be registered and annotated by the machine. Some of the machines, like the EVA, is doing automatically. Some of them is doing manually by annotations, like we're using the ESCO MIRI or the EmbryoScope or the PrimaVision or the GER. Okay. So one of the things that is important with these parameters is that are so easy and so, let's say, objective to measure. It's difficult that between me and some of you, we will do any mistake in annotating when is the time of the cleavage of the embryo to 2 cells, 3 cells, or 4 cells. So for sure that between us, we are going to share the same value. So it's obvious that it's very objective because it will not be difference between us in order to annotate that kind of things, and it's already published, in fact. So when we go forward in the embryo development, there are other timings of cleavages or parameters that are slightly more subjective. For example, the time of compaction. Maybe we can have difference between us when we consider that the embryo is compacted, or when the embryo is becoming a blastocyst, or when the embryo is becoming an expanded blastocyst. Obviously, probably it's easy for all of us to detect when the embryo is becoming an expanded blastocyst. Because we are getting a lot of information about those parameters, also we can count or we can calculate what is the time that the embryo needs to finalize one cell cycle. At the end, we are seeing different cell cycles of the embryo moving forward from the first cell cycle to the second one, third one, etc. So we are able to track those cell cycles. I guess that just by logical concept, the duration of the cell cycle may be potentially interesting because if the cell cycle is taking longer or shorter than expected, something is wrong in the machinery of the embryo. And also, the embryos or the blastomeres are connected between them, and then should keep at the same time. We must expect that the embryos are synchronized. All the blastomeres are synchronized, so we must expect any kind of synchronization in that process. And if there is any asynchrony between the blastomeres, we must expect that the communication between them is failing somehow, and there is something wrong in the machinery of the embryo, and that can be potentially affecting. Well, one of the things that we just studying the embryos and analyzing tons of data, you realize is how, for example, we just observe the embryos in our lab. We observe our embryos in our lab in the morning because we work in the morning, right? It's not because anything else. We go to work in the morning, but we don't go to work in the night, right? So we have adapted our evaluation of the embryos to our working hours. But that potentially may not be the right thing, because maybe the main events of embryo development are happening when we are sleeping at home, okay? So let's think about that, what we are doing this. And well, I have put here the timings that normally these main events happen. For example, the first cleavage in average used to happen at 6 in the afternoon if we want to check the first cleavage, okay? Normally 6 in the afternoon, I don't know here in Spain, but in Spain 6 in the afternoon, we're still, some of us are still working. But some of us are already at home, the kids used to leave that time the school, so we cannot be checking the embryos. And for example, the embryo used to reach 8 cells, which is our ideal number of cells of a day 3 embryo, at 1 a.m. in the morning, the day 3 of the development. I remember when I started working in the lab, our senior embryologist told me, Marcos, when you come to see the embryos on day 3, just wait a little bit, because if you check very early in the morning on day 3, probably none of them will have 8 cells. Well, it is obviously not true, because most of the embryos reach 8 cells early in the morning at 1 a.m. the day of day 3, okay? So this is a good example of some of the knowledge that we got from the past are not really true, because then you check the numbers and you see that this is not the case. So we are learning a lot from an embryologist point of view, for sure. And you can record all the timings of cleavages, and it's important. If you take a look to the distribution of these timings, or the duration of the second cell cycle, which is explained here, the time of cleavage of our cells, or the time of cleavage of the transition between 2 and 3, you see that not all the embryos behave in the same way. All the embryos are represented with a normal distribution, but there are embryos that are reaching 8 cells, embryos that are reaching blastocyst stage, and embryos that are implanted. If you take a look to the colors are different depending on the outcome of the embryo. It's not the same behavior if the embryo reaches a blastocyst, but in the embryo finally implanted. So from that simple observation, you must understand that if the behavior of the embryos is different, if the embryos implant or not, or the embryos reach a blastocyst or not, we potentially may use those parameters to select an embryo for transfer, right? Because if they behave different, we must be able to detect an embryo that has a chance to implant or not, or has a chance to reach a blastocyst. So, if you take a look to the literature, just those that are a little bit skeptical with these parameters, most of the publications that were done, this is a publication of 2013, still the numbers of papers were lower than now. Most of the publications reached the same conclusions. Most of the publications from different groups of people, just analyzing, for example, the transition between 2 and 3 cells, or between 3 and 4, reached the same numbers. So it looks that this normal distribution, this normal value, is something standardized and very evident because many publications reach the same point. So let's consider those parameters quite objective and trustable, because between different groups they got very similar results. So just pointing things that we can learn and write from neuroembryology, one good example is just when we do the warming of our embryos. Okay, we do vitrification, we do the warming, we put in the time lapse. We observe the behavior of that blastocyst. Normally, when we finish our vitrification, when we finish our warming, the blastocyst used to be collapsed. And then they normally re-expand, right? So we have been spending time observing those embryos that we are just warming. If you observe those embryos, for sure that you can analyze things about those embryos. What was the initial size of the blastocyst when it was contracted? What was the final size when expanded? What was the initial thickness of the zona pellucida? What was the final thickness? Is there any information in that behavior of the blastocyst after warming that may potentially be useful for selection? Well, this is a good example of that this is the case. How you can observe in detail the blastocyst and get information. For example, the initial area of the blastocyst when you do the warming, or the final area that is able to reach at the end, can be potentially linked with the outcome. If the blastocyst area is about close to 20,000 square meters, the implantation rate will become quite much higher than is below that number. Or if the final thickness of the zona pellucida, when the blastocyst is expanded, is below these 12 micrometers, the outcome also for sure will be higher. So what this slide means, that you can observe the blastocyst after warming, you can measure the final surface, you can measure the final thickness of the zona pellucida, and getting that information, you can have an idea of what will be the outcome of that embryo. So this is a good example of how the observation by time lapse, and this is not really related with timings, can become a parameter useful for selection or just for knowledge of the outcome. Okay. Other parameters that are potentially very clear, very obvious by using time lapse. This is the direct cleavage or the abnormal cleavage. Embryos that are moving directly to 3 cells. Well, this is an abnormal behavior because it's going to 3 cells that is going back to 1 and then it's going back to 2 and then to 3. That's sometimes happening. But what this is really important is that if you have the chance to observe this embryo with direct cleavage, the implantation rate of this embryo is below 3%. So just by having time lapse, you are able to detect that embryo. If you are able to discard it or not to select initially, you are sure that for sure your results will be better. Okay, so just taking a look to those cases. Okay, there is another paper done with the IVA, a nice paper published in Fertility and Sterility, already published, is not in press, that they studied this abnormal cleavage. Embryos that are moving from 1 to 3 cells have normal cleavage 1, and embryos that are moving from 1 to 4, but one blastomerium cleaves directly to 3 and the other one does not cleave. Okay, or this one cleaves to 2, but that one is cleaving to 3. So it's like a direct cleavage between 2 and 5. Those are abnormal cleavage. The incidence is around 80% of our embryos. This is the distribution of both. Both cases only 0.5. if you take a look to the blastocyst rate or the implantation rate of those embryos with abnormal cleavage is very, very low, below 4%. So what that means, that quite often, in around 30% of the cases, those embryos are selected for transfer because of the morphology is nice, okay? But those embryos has a very low implantation potential, even with good morphology. So this is one of the best examples of the utility of this technology. Deselection. Avoid the transfer of such kind of embryo that you know that has very low implantation potential. So other parameters that I like it that are consequence of our observation. Just observing, I'm sure that most of you observing the blastocyst, you have seen that in some cases the embryos collapse or contract. The blastocyst has a contraction of a collapse, right? You have seen it. You have seen a blastocyst that is already collapsed, and then you take a look to the blastocyst 2 or 3 hours later, it's already expanded. Well, we were just wondering what is going on with that collapse. And in fact, I remember when I started also working that some of the embryologists told me that when the blastocyst collapses, that's a good sign, because that means that the blastocyst is more alive and is trying to hatch. So we're trying to demonstrate that that was the truth, observing that collapse that you see in that video. Well, the incidence of blastocyst collapse is around 20% of the blastocyst. And if we take a look to the proportion of blastocysts that we transfer that has a collapse, and you take a look to the implantation rate, embryos with a contraction implant between 10 and 12% less than embryos without a collapse or contraction. So what that means, if I have several blastocysts available for transfer with relatively similar morphology, I will avoid to transfer an embryo with a collapse because I know that has less implantation potential than an embryo with. The incidence or the proportion of embryos that finally hatch is relatively similar, but we know that they have lower implantation. So it's another good example of doing observations with this technology and avoid to transfer that embryo because of this lower implantation potential. Well, another parameter that I like to analyze by time lapse that for sure can be better analyzed because you have more chance to review the whole development and you don't have that chance with single point morphological observation because you only check the embryos once per day is multinucleation. With the time lapse, you can track multinucleation from 2-cell stage until 5-6 cells. You can track every blastomere and you can track if there is any blastomere with multinucleation. So we did that work that we published this year in Fertility and Sterility to study the time multinucleation, a very careful study. Well, nice things about this. For example, the incidence of multinucleation in 2-cell stage is quite high. Around 42% of the embryos has multinucleation in 2-cell stage, quite high than expected. But if you go to a 4-cell stage on day 2, only 14% of the embryos are multinucleated, okay? And then the incidence you will see here. If the incidence initial is that, this is the final incidence, you see that there is a reversibility, which means that in 73% of the cases, the embryos that were multinucleated in 2-cell stage were not in 4-cell stage. So that was a reversibility in that multinucleation. If that is the case, if there is multinucleation, that is finally seeing the outcome. It looks that the presence of multinucleated blastomeres at 2-cell stage is not relevant for the final outcome. But if we are able to detect multinucleated cells at 4-cell stage, those embryos, even with one cell multinucleated, has lower implantation potential than embryos that has no multinucleation. So, from our point of view, taking care of the embryos at 4-cell stage and evaluate carefully the presence of multinucleation by time lapse may help you to do a better selection, because we see that the outcome is clearly affected. It's true that this is time consuming because check all the blastomeres and the nuclei is not easy. I mean, it takes time and also the optics of the time-lapse system should be good. I don't know if all the time-lapse system will be able to manage this presence of multinucleation at the same level. In our experience with the Gary, with the embryoscope, it looks that it's relatively easy to detect, but it takes time, so it's time consuming. So I have put you here several examples of things that you can use, you can analyze, you can study in the time by time lapse and use to deselect or discard embryos, initial embryos for transfer. And then it comes all the work that we did in the last years about selection by timings. This is more controversial because between all the publications, you may find people that say that all timings of cleavages that we select or we decide that are better are working for us, but maybe are not working for you because cultural conditions or the system is different. So there's more controversy behind these publications. Even, for example, that this paper was the most cited one in 2013 in human reproduction. So by far it has been a reference in the field. So basically what we did was just analyze these objective parameters and find that from our data there were times in which the embryos tend to implant more. So from that approach that was relatively easy, we just, let's say, detect or define timings that from our point of view and with our own data were related with higher implantation potential. Even some of them with better correlation, some of them with very good correlation with implantation. So from that point, when we started to do it in that way, we decided to use time lapse for selection also. I have explained to you many parameters that you can use for this selection that are relatively simple and will work for all the clinics because are just things that you can detect immediately. But from that point, we use actively the time lapse also for selection. So we use those timings for selection and it works for us. And I will show you our results. Basically what we were doing was a grading of the embryos using those timings of cleavages. And you cannot argue with me that that way of selection or that way of classification is more objective than the morphology because it's based in numbers. It's not based in any kind of interpretation or view like embryologist or me like embryologist. It's a different thing. So when we did that grading of the embryos, we observed nice things, and I'm going to spend the next slides doing a comparison with morphology. So put in your mind morphology and put in your mind the timings of cleavages, and I will try to explain to you what is working better. Okay? You will find in the literature claims that says that morphology is superior than timings or morphokinetics for selection. I can show you by several works that this is not true. It's just the opposite. But we have by far now the largest database of embryos analyzed, and we are completely sure that, we are not completely sure if the time lapse improve your clinical result because there are controversy, but we are completely sure that morphology is less efficient for embryo selection than morphokinetics by far, and I will show you with several examples. This is one of those, one of the initial works. In this initial work, you have the morphology categorization. This is the 5 categories of day 3 by Esbe, and this is our time lapse categories. Well, one of the things that you will see here is the size of the circles are depending on the number of embryos that reach in each category. So most of the embryos are in the intermediate categories, few are in the best and few are in the worst. Meanwhile, the categorization by time lapse is quite equal between them, okay? Then the capacity to predict implantation is slightly better than with morphology. That was our initial publication, but we will go further to that, okay? If you take a look to the morphology categories, these categories of morphology in day 3 based, this is ABCD morphology by Messeger and by time lapse. Messeger is the Spanish Society of Embryology, and our way of classification of the embryos in day 3 is the same one than Esbe, and probably the same that you use. It's true that in Spain we like to use a Spanish Society of Embryology categorization, which is more or less the same one than Esbe, but in our country, of the embryologists likes to use their own categorization, which is the same probably than Esbe. It's exactly the same than Esbe. Well, one of the things that you will see here is that you classify your embryos by morphology from A to E. Most of the embryos, 52% of the embryos are classified as B, which means that every 10 embryos that you have, 5 have the same morphology category. So 5 embryos looks very similar between us, okay? Which means that in any case, there are many cases that I don't know which one to select because they are similar by morphology, okay? Just take a look to another point of view. These are categories of Messeger in colors, and these are the categories of our algorithm. If you see the most frequent category of morphology in each one of the categories of morphokinetics is the B1, the B category of morphology. And even, for example, in a B category morphology, I can find all the categories of morphokinetics, which means that inside every category of morphology, I have the choice to select between different morphokinetic categories, which means that in many cases, just using morphology like the first approach, I have the option to use morphokinetics to try to select better, because I have all the categories inside each one. So from that point of view, morphology is not as precise because most of the embryos look very similar by morphology. But I will go further with that, okay? For example, this is data from one of our papers, morphology versus morphokinetics. If you take a look to the data and the proportions, 70% of the embryos are involved in these better categories of morphokinetics, and the best category of morphology is only 16%, and it's the only one that has a significantly higher implantation than the others. And remember that most of the embryos are categorized as B by morphology. So what is happening is that in many cases morphology is not able to select better because most of the embryos look very similar. Okay, so this is the first approach, but I would like to go further in order to explain this even in blastocyst morphology. With the morphokinetics categorization in our clinic by retrospective studies, we reached the point that categories were related with implantation, with large data sets of analysis, and also were related with blastocyst morphology or blastocyst final blastocyst formation with good morphology. So which means that way of categorization, using timings and categorizing your embryos in 4 or 5 categories, were related with implantation potential and were related with blastocyst formation. And this is quite a strong data because it was based in a large number of patient analyses. If you take a look again to the morphology categories, well, I have put you here pictures to have your idea what is an A category or an M1, a B, a C, or a D, and or very bad morphology. This is our embryos that were transferred by morphology, and this is data from a randomized control trial. Well, you take a look to the data again, most of the embryos, 50% of them, are of B category. So every 10 embryos, 5 are of B category transfer, which means that between all the embryos that I have, 50% of them look very similar, and normally I have to select one. And then also the implantation potential. If you take a look to the categories of time lapse, these 5 categories, first of all, you see that the distribution of categories is moving towards the best category of morphokinetics because we try to select those. And also you take a look to the implantation potential of those embryos is slightly better, slightly higher than just the morphology categories, which means that it looks that we are able to select slightly better because we are able to select embryos with more implantation potential, okay? This is data from all of you that are skeptical. It is coming from a randomized control trial, so it's a very controlled group of patients. Another thing that potentially, because my intention was to cover other topics and then also we will go to describe also morphology. I mean, can we use morphokinetics because, I mean, if we're coming from a way of analyzing the embryos that is more objective, can we use it also for, let's say, to select better or even to do a sex selection? Well, sex selection is not allowed in Spain. It's not allowed by any basic technology, but I have no idea if we can do it by that because there's no regulation about that. So we just try to, and we did a publication, we tried to see if the behavior of the embryos were different between males and females. Well, unfortunately, we weren't able to manage any nice way of classification, but it's true that the embryos that were getting those parameters with this time of compaction in that range and the synchrony of less than 2 hours, in average, those embryos has a female ratio of 71%. So maybe potentially, and I can see because in our randomized control trial in the group of the embryoscope we have more females. It looks that by time lapse we can alternately the sex ratio and have more women than men. Okay, by doing morphokinetics. So it looks that potentially you can increase the chance to have a baby that is a female than a male by using morphokinetics. That's all. But we cannot use for sex selection for sure. Okay. This is pure research, but who knows will come in the future. In that study, we have the capacity to analyze the stem culture media of the embryo and just measure the proteins that were present there. And look if we were able to combine that with the times in order to, let's say, to select better. We just use a proteomic profile and analyzing around 10, 12 proteins that were detectable in the media, we just realized that, for example, the presence of interleukin 6 was slightly higher in the embryo that implanted, and the combination of this with a right duration of the cell cycle were detecting embryos with a nice implantation potential of around 90%. This is pure research, the numbers are very low, but I mean, potentially the use of the combination of this technology, both technologies has the potential to improve the selection, and who knows will come in the future, but I mean, just by curiosity, just put an example of maybe the combination of both technologies will come in the future with a better selection. So I would like to spend some time with the blastocyst, because most of the time-lapse research has been focused on day 3 initially, and most of the publications were done on day 3, and many of the publications were saying that we were improving the selection on day 3. But what is happening if we're going transfer on blastocyst? Is there any room for the time-lapse to improve the selection? Well, we did this paper, this research that was published just last year in Fertility and Sterility. And this study, basically what we did is just work with all of our patients of time-lapse that we do culture on blastocyst. We tried to define a way of selection, and then we tried to validate in a prospective way. In that study, we came with this. We tried to measure the time of expansion, which is a little bit subjective to do it, and also we realized that the embryos that are cleaving very well from 5 to 8 cells, very, very synchronized, are better embryos, or embryos that has more chances to implant when you move to blastocyst, and also the time of expansion. So we defined an algorithm that you may see here that can potentially use for blastocyst selection that measure the time of expansion and also the synchrony of the third cell cycle. That algorithm came with a selection of embryos with a grading that comes from 72% to 39% for blastocyst selection. Okay? So it was a way of selection of blastocysts using lay parameters related with implantation potential. Okay, so then you will tell me, okay, what is better, to work with just the morphology of the blastocyst or use those parameters? Well, if you compare, this is the morphology categories of blastocysts, again from the Spanish Society of Embryology, which is very similar, it's following Gardner's criteria and is very similar to ESRE, and this is our way of selection by time-lapse. If you take a look to the numbers, morphology works well, morfokinetics works well, but again, if you take a look, it looks that we are able to detect embryos with higher implantation potential with time-lapse in comparison with standard morphology. And which is even more important is the combination of both. Most of you will know the possibility of using multiple analysis, multivariable analysis, logistic regression, because our intention was to weigh the capacity of the morphology on blastocysts to detect an embryo with higher implantation potential in comparison with the capacity of time-lapse. If you combine both in the same model, and you will see here, morphology becomes not significant in comparison with morphokinetics to detect embryos with different implantation potential. So an embryo that is classified like A by morphokinetics has more than 2 times more chances to implant than an embryo that is classified as D. But there is not any significant difference between an embryo classified as A and B by morphology when we put in the same model than morphokinetics. Which means, the first example that I put to you here, that if you are just thinking, what is better, morphology or morphokinetics, forget it if you have better or worse results. If you are comparing with the standard way of selection, here we demonstrate with good numbers that morphokinetics is superior than morphology to detect an embryo for transfer. Okay? So it's the first example that I'm going to put you. We will go through that. But let's imagine our clinic and 4 different situations. One is that I do transfer on day 3. Let's imagine our standard cycles. Not talk about all, but let's talk about the standard cycle that we do, patients without indication of PGS. And we have these 4 options. We can do transfer on day 3, we can do transfer on day 5, we can do transfer on day 3 and combine with time-lapse, and we can do transfer on day 5 and combine with time-lapse. Well, you take a look to the numbers, it looks that the combination of time-lapse in both strategies, day 3 and day 5, improve your outcome. And improve your outcome between 10 and 50%. And this means that blastocyst is doing better than day 3, that blastocyst is even doing better than day 3 and 10 labs, but blastocyst in combination with 10 labs can give you better results than just blastocyst selection. And this is based in a randomized control trial, but I'm talking to you with our experience that is close to 20,000 cycles already done. So we have done a lot of cycles with 10 labs, and that data is coming with strong numbers. So let me introduce you to EVA, okay? EVA is, I have shown you before, is a dark field 10 labs technology. It's an automatic machine, and it's doing an evaluation of the embryo automatically. As you may see there, the blastomeres are tracked automatically. So the machine is able to detect where is the blastomere and track automatically. And it's giving to you a score of the embryo automatically, high, medium, or low. So you just put the embryos there, and you will get a score. The score is based on those parameters, on the duration of the second cell cycle and the symptom. That one will become an blastocyst, and of course that one that is low will be arrested. Okay, for example. I cannot give you another example, as you can imagine. So, how this works? Well, there is a paper published by Joe Conahan in Fertility and Sterility, and put 3 embryologists. Embryologist number 1, embryologist number 2, embryologist number 3. All these 3 embryologists looking at the embryos on day 3, they were trying to forecast which embryo will not become a blastocyst. Okay? So the embryologist number 2, that can be myself, only in 40% of the cases was able to detect which embryo will not become a blastocyst. So it's even better to use a coin, to flip a coin, than an embryologist to forecast which embryo will become a blastocyst. And then we have another embryologist, which is a very good one, okay, that is able to forecast in 80% of the cases. What is the message? That between us, there are good or better embryologists than others, or with more or less experience, that are able to forecast which embryo will become a blastocyst. But in that study, when they combined the time lapse with morphology, the EVA with morphology, all 3 embryologists improved their abilities to forecast which embryo will not become a blastocyst and reach 85%. So this is another example of how the combination of both, in this case with an automatic device, will be able to help you to select the best embryo. So how EVA works in the clinic? Well, we have been using EVA for around 2 years in our clinic, and we have the largest data set of that technology. And if you take a look, when the embryo is classified like high by the EVA, automatically the implantation potential is around 46%, and if it's classified as low, only 27%. Okay? So the machine automatically select your embryos or classify your embryos, and that classification is related with implantation potential. Again, here I try to compare the ability of the morphology with the ability of the EVA to select the embryo. So if you take a look to this slide, when the machine is classifying your embryo like high, it has 2 times more chances to implant than if the embryo is classified as low. If you compare with morphology, morphology is not significant again. When you put in the same model, the EVA is superior than morphology, is superior than the embryologist classification to detect the best embryo for transfer. Okay? So it's another example, it's the third one that I put to you, that morphokinetics is superior than morphology to detect an embryo with different implantation potential. So now we have to think about that. If we are observing better the embryos, if we are not disturbing the embryos because we keep in the incubator all the time, we must expect an improvement, right? We must expect it. So what is in the literature about this? Well, there are 3 randomized control trials only published. This one, it was just to compare the capacity of the time lapse to improve the outcome. That was done in Scandinavia, in which they do transfer on day 2 only, so it's a very special situation. They compared using time lapse or not using, not for selection, just for incubation. Just put your embryos in the time lapse or not put it and take a look to the outcome. If you see the results, no difference at all. Then these 2 real randomized control trials, one that we published in 2014 and the other one that was published in 2015 from a group of Cleveland Clinic. Well, in this study, you take a look at the data. They just use the embryoscope in this case. They culture the embryos in the embryoscope in both groups, control and time lapse, but in one group they used morphokinetics for selection and the other one not. That study was underpowered because they have an improvement around 7%, but they use only 100 patients. If they will perform the number of cycles that we perform in a randomized control trial for around 400 cycles, they will got probably a significant difference, but with those 100, they didn't get it. And the experience of Cleveland Clinic, because I know them very well, is that they started the study. They did the study for 1 year, and they decided to stop the study because they were having better results in the TILAB system than in the control group, and they were just not continuing doing the study because they were getting better results. So they decided to stop, and they published that work. If you are from a critical side, you see that say, okay, TILAB does not work because there's not significant improvement. But if you have this technology in your clinic, and you have a group with 6-7% better outcome, what you will do? You will use it or not? Probably you will use it. So that was the example. The other one is that one that we published in fertility and sterility, and in that study, there was an improvement in the outcome of around 10% in the implantation rate, in the clinical pregnancy rate, a decrease in the miscarriage rate of around 10-12%. But the difference in that study, in the study that we published, is that we compare a standard incubator, box incubator, with the embryoscope. So the main critic of our work is that the improvement may be a combination of all things. First of all, better culture conditions, and second one, the morphokinetic selection. In the study of Cleveland Clinic, of Goodman, they were comparing the same technology. But I mean, if you take a look to the outcome, and if you take a look to the newborn delivery rate, the delivery rate in the TILABs still is 10% higher than in the control group. So we're getting data of delivery rate. And even the perinatal outcome, the obstetric outcome, is comparable between these two technologies. So apparently, also, the TILAB technology by itself does not increase the incidence of perinatal abnormalities, maybe because of the life. Just thinking about bad things of TILABs. Again, those that claim that morphology is superior than morphokinetics, there is not any kind of a study like this by morphology. So there is no evidence behind morphology that supports better than morphokinetics. So even those that are very critical with morphokinetics should think about the evidence that we have in morphology, which is nothing, okay, in that case. So then, imagine that you don't have TILABs in your lab. How often are you missing important information? So I have put you here both examples that are important. First of all, you are missing direct clips that have explained to you that has a very important incidence in the outcome, and you are missing a good proportion or a high proportion of multinucleated embryos. So if you, let's say, forgot about all the things that I have explained to you until now, just think about two main reasons that may help you to deselect embryos, and two main reasons that may explain that you will have better results by using this technology. And then who does a randomized control trial on this? I mean, if I know that embryos with direct cleavage implant only 2%, how I can do a randomized control trial? It's unethical. I mean, it's impossible. You ask me to transfer an embryo with a direct cleavage, I will never transfer that embryo like a first option, because I know that that patient will have very low implantation potential. So it's impossible to do a randomized control trial. Those that are claiming from randomized control trials are claiming to do studies that potentially may harm our patients, and it's not something that we don't want to do. So let's move forward and think about the future of this technology. Well, in the future of this technology, I believe that the software will become very important. The software, in order to, let's say, study the embryos by the computer and analyze things that we are unable to do by our own. For example, this is a good example of this paper that just tracks the fragments of the embryos. You know, like embryologists, that quantify the fragments is a difficult work, and even tracking them is even worse. So the possibility of doing by a software is amazing, and we don't know the potential of this. In that case, they were able to track those fragments and relate also with the outcome. And of course, we have to think about PGS, because PGS is becoming every time more predominant in our lives, in our day of work, and we're just wondering also if we're able to combine PGS with TILABs. Is there any room to improve the outcome by combining this? Well, there is two good examples. This one is a paper published by Yang, in which PGS patients One group used morphokinetics for selection of blastocysts, euploid blastocysts, and the other group without using. That study demonstrated an improvement in the outcome. The second one is a study that we did together with Laura Reti, Genera in Italy. We just compared embryos that implanted and embryos that did not implant, blastocysts that implanted, and blastocysts that did not implant that were euploid. And we take a look to the parameters of time lapse. We came with something like this. We came again with a selection based on the time of compaction and the synchrony of the embryos that were able to distinguish euploid blastocysts with different implantation potential. So room for selection of blastocysts by different implantation potential. If you compare with morphology, here is a blastocyst category by morphokinetics, and here is the blastocyst category by morphology. Well, both are related with implantation potential. Both are not good to predict implantation because there are things that we cannot predict by time lapse. I mean, implantation is not only dependent on embryo, it's also dependent on the endometrium. But again, and this is very important, is underlined in this slide. If we put at the same level the morphology of the blastocyst euploid and the morphokinetics of a blastocyst euploid, again, is the fourth example that I put to you. In a population of euploid blastocysts, morphokinetics is doing better than morphology to detect an embryo with different implantation potential. Look, between an embryo that we know that is euploid by PGS, if it's classified like A with that algorithm, it will have 4 more chances to implant, 4 times more chances to implant, 4 times that an embryo that is classified as D. And in these 2 cases, the embryos are euploid. So between euploid embryos, there is a lot of different implantation potential. So there's room for improving the selection in those cases that we are able to do it, because in many cases we have only one euploid blastocyst, there's no way to selection. But time lapse can do it better, can be combined with PGS and can get better results. That's the message of this study. So again, just thinking in the future, what we can see beyond the standard of evaluation. Maybe with the software, we can study fragmentation patterns I have explained to you. We can study other structures. We can see embryo dynamics. We can see changes in shape. Can you try to press these 3 videos? Because that will work. This one, the first one too. There are 3 videos here, 1, 2, and 3. Can you press them? Mm-hmm. Well, this is an example of how the computer is tracking the blastomeres, and it's just doing a graphic of similarity or graphic of features of the embryo. So this is nothing that we can do with AI. It's just the computer analyzing one frame to another one. So what if we can go deep in that graphics and maybe get the extra information that is potentially useful for the embryo? So let's say that there is some graphics here that are related with that graphics are related with the cleavage. Every time that the embryo cleaves, there's a change in the pattern of the aspect of the picture, but also there are changes in the shape of the blastomeres. Well, there is something behind. This is the work of, this is an predictive test by the IVA that is called Extend. So it's putting together these 500 pictures of embryos, are processed automatically. The system is able to do a single cell follow-up. It's doing a picture comparison between different frames. It's getting 74 values per picture, and also is doing comparison between pictures by similarities, with these time-dependent changes. So it comes with something like this. For example, analyze the texture of the blastomere. The texture of the blastomere is something that is very, let's say, subjective from our point of view, but from our computer, the computer is able to analyze this texture and get a value that we potentially may use for something. So what basically did the guys of IVA is to create a new algorithm based in 5 parameters. You put in the IVA system the donor or the age of the egg, depending on the mother age, of course. This P2 and P3, the duration of the cycle of the cycle, and the position between 3 and 4. Include this post-P3 analysis, analyze the computer, the aspect of the blastomeres, the surface, the changes in the aspect. It gives you also the cell count on day 3, and together with that is classifying your embryos in a different way. I have bring to you this example because this is a combination between our observation of the embryos the timings of cleavages and also the analysis that the software can be done to the embryos to analyze the surface of the blastocysts, of the blastomeres, the similarity between one frame and another, and put all this information together to generate a new model. So let's say that this is an improvement of the way of analysis of the embryos coming from a software. But new machines are coming into our lab. These are 5 of our embryologists that are just touching this new time-lapse machine that came, that is the Gary. And I mean, we were very excited because every time that we have a new toy in the lab, we like it. I mean, we play with them and potentially there's a lot of things to do. I'm going to do the Gary because it's a new time-lapse machine that probably you still don't know. I'm not selling Garys, I don't have anything to do with them. I'm not shares, whatever. I mean, I'm just bringing to you another time-lapse system that we're trying. Well, I like the evolution of this hardware because now you have individual chambers for every embryo. I mean, in comparison, for example, with the embryoscope that is the same chamber for all of them. You have a touch screen in the middle, quite easy to manipulate. You have all your embryos all together in one drop. You can have 16 embryos all together, and that embryos are put in a fixed position where there is a camera that is moving around these embryos to taking pictures. And then even you can have a second dish position for putting then your blastocysts, your transfer dish. In every patient incubator with a camera, you have the patient name, the temperature, the CO2 concentration. You have all your patients in the same screen. You can go in detail to every patient, check each one of your embryos, put it what is the final destination. And if you can press that video, can you press that video? Excuse me? Can you play that one? Well, you have seen it before, but I mean, the manufacturer says, and I mean, still we are studying, but they are using even better resolution, close to 5 megapixels resolution. So it looks that even you are able to see more detail on the morphology of the embryo because you have better quality or better accuracy, let's say better magnification, not because it's the same magnification, but more in detail you can get all the data of the embryo. So, I mean, again, this is an evolution of the time-lapse system, and potentially is an improvement from those that is already, all the things that are already done. So just to finalize, I would like to show you the evolution of the software. This is a prototype of software that was designed in California, United States, that basically what it's able to do is you upload from your time-lapse system all your annotation, you upload all your images of your embryos, and you can work with them. At the end, each embryo is represented like a dot in a graphic. So, for example, these are embryos that reach blastocysts that are blue, or embryos that did not reach. And these are the axis you have in the x-axis, the 2 to 3 cells in duration, and here between the 3 and 4. What you can do in such a kind of things is to compare in a graphic different type of embryos. And that can be done in something like this, that I really like it. Imagine that I have this patient with these 10 embryos that are here, that I want to compare with embryos that implanted. So I can have access to a database of embryos that implanted, and I can choose, for example, the time of cleavage between 2 and 3 cells and the transition between 2 and 3 and 4. And I have embryos that implanted, embryos that did not implant, that are in red, and I have my patient. So I upload that patient in the system. The embryos are put in the graphic and automatically are compared with embryos that implanted. So I have a population of 1,000 embryos that implanted. On my first day of using of time-lapse, I can compare the embryos of my patient with 1,000 embryos that implanted. So automatically the machine is giving me a ranking of the embryos. So I can have a direct rank between the first one and the second one, the third one. So the machine is telling me which embryo is more similar to the embryo that implanted in that clinic, and immediately I can get a classification of the embryos based on morfokinetics. This is very important because those that are users of time-lapse and believe that the algorithm that we have created does not work in your clinic because you have different cultural conditions or whatever, you can have access to such a kind of software in which immediately after doing the evaluation of the embryos, you upload in the system and the machine automatically is giving you a ranking of the embryos that will help you to select the best one. So maybe the future is in that way. Just giving you the data of this automatic software is called Dana. Okay, so data using different parameters is quite similar to the implantation potential of the already classification methods that we have published, like one that's published by Natalia Basile, or just by morphology. So this is an automatic device doing a comparison, and this is the morphology. And if you take a look also to the proportions, this data software is classifying all your embryos, and it's relatively similar to the classification of the embryo by our own algorithm. So let's say this is based on an automatic system. It's an automatic software. It allows you to do a classification of the embryo immediately. You don't need to create any kind of algorithm, and it works. Okay? So these are an example of what will be the future. So hopefully you have learned new things about time-lapse research. I mean, I have tried to summarize in half an hour, 45 minutes. And just to show you the picture, this is the picture of the people that are working in IDA Valencia, where 200 people working in our clinic, 25 embryologists, and you're always welcome to come to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Our heads of our session disappeared in the last moment. And I would like to finish our session, but first of all, have you any question about the last presentation? I would like to ask you one very provocative question. What do you think that maybe in the future that we will cultivate all the embryos in embryoscopes under the morphokinetic analysis, or it's not necessary?
At the end, I think it's a question of money now. This technology is very expensive. If we have, I can tell you our case. In our clinic, embryologists, if you ask the embryologists, what do you want? Do you want to have all the clinic with time-lapse machines? They will say yes. But then if you ask to the director, they say no, it's very expensive. So from our point of view, it's great because research, study, practically is very comfortable to us, but behind that is a lot of money with the expense. So I don't know if all the time-lapse companies, all the incubator companies will put the camera. If that will be the case, everybody will use it. And if it keeps being very expensive, we will keep only 20-25% of our cycle. I don't think that we will go more than that.
But, please, Dr. Casuto. He is against illusion.
No, don't say that before. Just thank you for the presentation, Mark. But please tell me, if you got a blastocyst on the 5, if it's coming from chaotic way or it's coming from normal way, you think there is a big difference between them? First question. Second, what do you think? What is more important for this incubator? Is the camera or is the incubator system?
Well,
You remember the two questions?
yeah. The first one at the end, you're telling me which is more important, if the morphology, or if you have a morphology, good morphology, if you take into account the history of that blastocyst, right?
No, it's not exactly that. Okay, tell me for the second question.
The second question, I mean, the answer is already done because there is two randomized control trials. In the second one that is already published, the improvement by morphokinetics was slightly lower than ours. So in ours, we were combining incubator and morphokinetics, and we got an improvement of around 11%, and they got around 7%. So it looks that both are important, and in order to rate, we are not sure which one is more important, probably at the same level. If we compare with box incubators, the big ones. But for sure, the morphokinetics improves, and which is the weight of each one of them is something that I cannot answer still because we don't have such a kind of a study. But if we take a look to the literature, it looks that there is a 5% improvement based on the incubator by itself, and 7-8% of improvement based on morphokinetics, approximately.
Yes.
And regarding the morphology,
No. Thank you. Thank you. No, just I tell you this question because I'm sure that this kind of incubator is very important, it's very nice. For me, it's more important for research, to look what happened. But in routine, it's more complicated, it takes a lot of time. And you don't think so that if you have the same incubator without the camera, without the software, it's enough to get the blastocyst undefined if you are transfer undefined, because you are in the same condition. And the time-lapse embryoscope or Gary, it's very, like you said, very, very expensive, not only for the investment, also for every day when you put different box, it's different. And if you have the same incubator without the software on the camera, I think so it's enough.
You careful.
Yes.
Some comment.
No. I mean, if you think that just putting the camera is true, it's not. I mean, it depends on your needs. Or, I mean, we have been using the labs in ABI mainly for doing a lot of research, okay? A lot. And we are happy with that. Together with that, we are able to, we have seen that for masks has been a great tool also, and patients like it. Like an alternative, and some doctors like it like an alternative to offer to the patients, even when they don't know what to do. Say, okay, I'm going to offer you an alternative. I'm going to try to use the time lapse and try to select better. And also some patients like it because they want to have the video. So there is also a lot of marketing behind, for sure, that is important. That is not science. I mean, you're coming from a country which is public and you don't care about that, but I can tell you that in our case it's very, very important. So there are many aspects behind that are. So the investment is very high, and I understand why many clinics don't push it, because there's a lot of money behind, which is important.
You have questions?
I have a very practical question. Marcos, if you have selected your embryos and you have two perfect morphological embryos, and those both are also perfect by morphokinetics, which one would you pick? The one with the multinucleation at the fourth cell stage, mild multinucleation at fourth cell stage, or the one that had a contraction on the blastocyst?
The contraction by far. The contraction is less important. With multinucleation, we have seen decreases bigger than with multinucleation. The decrease in the implantation potential in our database is quite much. I mean, if you try to weight, like which is worse, multinucleation, like direct cleavage is the worst parameters that time lapse we have seen that are related with implantation in our data.
You try to make all those secondary factors that you publish for the embryo deselection. Have you tried to rank them between one another? Because we have often this case.
Yeah.
We have one imperfect and the second imperfect.
So we have not ranked by a multivariable analysis, but I'm completely sure that direct cleavage is the worst by far. Direct cleavage is the worst by far. The second one by far worst is multinucleation. And then the others are in the middle, I would say.